What's up? My name's Mara Merlin. Here's the story. So I'm a huge Marvel fan, and before Captain Marvel came out, I wanted to do some Avengers Endgame predictions before I had all the events of Captain Marvel to add to my predictions, because I've already got a ton of predictions and Captain Marvel is definitely gonna solidify some things for me, but I wanted to get my original statements out there first. As for right now, I'm just gonna go through my very basic predictions for Avengers Endgame, given the trailers that we've been given, past events, past storylines, and any details in Avengers Infinity War that I think are helpful for determining the events of Avengers Endgame. Let's just get right into it. So, huge spoiler alert, if you haven't seen Avengers Infinity War, do not watch this video. But also, if you haven't seen Avengers Infinity War by now and you're planning on seeing it, I really don't know what you're waiting for. Because it's been out for a while, everybody's been talking about it. Personally, I don't have that much self-control. I couldn't not watch it until this very second, so like, if you haven't seen it yet, I applaud you. You have a huge amount of self-control, but also, get on that. Like, what are you waiting for? Moving on. So when we last saw our favorite superheroes in Avengers Infinity War, many of the new ones had been dusted. And I will refer to it as dusted. They no longer exist. They're no longer on this plane of existence. But our golden oldies, aka Captain America, Iron Man, Black Widow, Hawkeye, Hulk, Thor, those guys, all still alive. Rocket Raccoon is alive from the Guardians of the Galaxy, and Nebula is alive from the Guardians of the Galaxy, which is very interesting. I believe M'Baku is still alive from the Black Panther crew, as well as Nakia. And Shuri, I don't think Shuri's alive. Which breaks my heart, because she's spectacular, and like a character that I never saw coming but stole my heart immediately. I'm gonna start with Hulk. So Hulk just kind of does what he wants. Now the thing about Hulk though is that we didn't particularly see a lot of Hulk specifically in Avengers Infinity War. And the Hulk, the reason for this is some have theorized that the Hulk is actually scared of Thanos and will not come out, therefore leaving poor scientist Bruce Banner to fend for himself essentially against Thanos. It would be the logical conclusion to make that Hulk's storyline within the Avengers franchise could end with him getting his groove back. I'd like to see him do something to Thanos akin to what he did to Loki in the first Avengers movie, where he just like kind of whaps him around. I think that'd be hilarious. I'd love to see that. I think that would be awesome. Do I think that will happen? No, but a girl can dream. It's also important to note right now that not all of these theories, I think, are necessarily things that have to happen or even will happen. Some of them are just things I'd like to see happen. Hulk, I really hope they don't bring back that weird-ass storyline where Hulk and Black Widow are in love with each other. I don't think that's necessary. I think that's a huge time waster. They already have, apparently the movie is already long enough to deserve an intermission, and it's very, very long. I'm looking forward to it. I want them to spare us no time at all. But that being said, I think that to include another glimpse of the Black Widow Hulk love storyline is a huge waste of time. It's just not worth it. Moving on to Thor. Now, Thor is an interesting cat because obviously he's mega powerful, but a lot of his storyline has to do with like, is he worthy? Is he strong enough? Thor basically just lost so many people that were important to him, but also in doing so, he kind of unlocked a new power, a new kind of rage. Thor, I'd really like to see Thor just kind of keep making use of his power, wrangle the last of the Asgardians. We're not sure what happened to Valkyrie. Word is that Valkyrie survived the snap, along with Korg, I believe. And if you've seen Thor Ragnarok, I love him. I would love to see them get in on Avengers Endgame, but I suppose now is a good time to mention that I don't really see the Russo brothers bringing in any of the more minor characters to help our central team out here, because they already got rid most of the characters who died in the snap are huge fan favorites, newer ones who would have been great to have in this, but for whatever reason, they thought that it would be better if they were snapped, because we see this particular team, the first Avengers team, all together, sans their new buddies. I'm guessing that it's going to be centrally focused on that Avengers team with minimal interaction from anybody else who could be helpful. I am going to swoop in here and say I would love to see the Defenders make a cameo. I know that might be an unpopular opinion. A lot of people don't really like the Defenders that much as a team, as a show, to the point where Netflix actually canceled it. I love the Defenders. I love Frank Castle, the Punisher, and I'd love to see them even just make a cameo, just a shout out to these heroes that are really, really cool in my opinion. I think maybe not enough justice has been done to them, but I think that they're really, really cool, and I'd like to see at least a glimpse of them. We see glimpses of the events of other Avengers movies in the Defenders shows, in the Marvel Netflix shows, so I think it would be cool to just give a little shout out to Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Iron Fist, Luke Cage, Frank Castle, the Punisher. The Punisher, now I stand by this, the Punisher could take out Thanos in a heartbeat. Thanos could not beat the Punisher one-on-one. I know you people are gonna come in here and realistically be like, oh, realistically, Thanos has the Infinity Gauntlet, Thanos could destroy Frank Castle, blah 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 blah. I mean, yeah, he could. But also, if you took away Thanos' power and you just put them in a room with like raw strength and you took away Frank Castle's guns, I think Frank Castle has the strategy and the skill to beat the hell out of Thanos, or at the very least, I would love to see him try. Moving on from my huge crush on Frank Castle, the Punisher, back to Thor. A huge part of Thor's storyline is Loki, and I will get to Loki in a second because Loki ties into a lot of my theories here. If we take into consideration the fact that they left us with only the original team for going into Avengers Endgame, then it kind of actually lends more heat to the theory that Loki has a part to play in Avengers Endgame. And side note, I am ignoring right now the fact that Loki is supposedly having his own show come out soon. That indicates that he is alive, although he is very old. He's a god. He's very old, and so the show could take place at another point in his like thousands of years long lifespan, which is possible, but it also seems to indicate that he's alive in some capacity. I'm just going to ignore that for now for the sake of argument and what we have to work with in the movies. So Loki was obviously a huge part of the first Avengers movie. Given that Loki was the villain in Avengers 1, it would make a lot of sense for him to come back in some capacity in the very last Avengers movie. Also, given the fact that they've given him a redemption arc like they have, it would make a lot of sense for him to come back in some heroic capacity. Now, I know a lot of people want Loki to be dead just because, you know, Marvel never kills anyone. And that's why a lot of people do think Loki's dead, because they're like, Marvel never kills anyone, so Loki's definitely gone for good. They wouldn't bring him back again. But let's consider for a second Loki as a character. Why would Loki have come back as a character so many times, if not to prove, in this instance, that he does have the capability of coming back? Many people have indicated the fact that he did not resume his frost giant form as an indication that he is still very much alive. I think that this is a possibility. When Thanos choked the life out of him, he did not revert back to frost giant form, because he really only keeps up the illusion, the Asgardian illusion, because he's using the magic to do it. Being dead, he can't use that magic, which is another indication that I do think he's alive. He's also cloned himself before, and as I'm saying this, like, I'm starting to think about when he sent clones to talk to Thor, when he's like used illusions of himself. Thor's been able to throw things through him, like we saw in the scene where Thor's being held prisoner in Thor Ragnarok. But I do think that somebody with magic as powerful as Loki's does have the capability to make that a thing. How would he come back into the picture then? Well, there are several ways he could come back into the picture, and I'm going to use that as a segue to get into my next topic of conversation. Tony Stark, Iron Man, very cool guy. Even though I was Team Cap in Civil War, I do love, there is still a special place in my heart for Iron Man. I'm looking at my notes for this, and just because I have so many theories that I needed to organize them. So it says Tony, Space Oddity, and then below it, it says Ground Control to Captain Steve, which is how you know that I was writing this at 3 a.m. Because I think that's really funny. I know it's not actually that funny. Moving on from my bad joke. So, I don't think, some people seem to think that Tony is gonna tragically die up in his spacecraft with Nebula. I really don't think that's the case. And the reason I think this is partially because his and Steve's storyline hasn't, Steve being Captain America, their storyline has not resolved yet. I don't think either of them can die until they've at least seen each other again or made up in some capacity. More on that later. Many say he'll be saved by Captain Marvel, and I think this is very highly plausible, and I think that this is probably what's gonna happen. Although, I think that they might end up encountering Loki. I think that Loki would kind of have a similar interaction with the windshield of the spaceship like Thor did when Thor landed on the windshield of the Guardians spaceship in Avengers Infinity War. And I think it would be really funny to see Loki end up as a bug on the windshield of that same spaceship that his brother did. I think that's kind of likely, if provided Loki is just floating through space aimlessly, not quite dead yet. He could very well end up on the windshield of the Guardians ship that Tony and Nebula have now commandeered. What I think would be also, I think that would be also like a really funny interaction to have between Tony and Loki, just given their history, but they're not, neither of them are really in a position to turn down help right now, so that should be interesting. Which leads me to Captain America, who is probably losing his marbles by now. This breaks my heart to say because Captain America is one of my all-time favorites, but I do think that Captain America will end up dead. Breaks my heart, but I think it's very possible. Much of his storyline is centered around, obviously, the fact that he's not in his right time. He doesn't have much to hold onto from his past except for those two people. Peggy dying coincides with about the time that Bucky wanders back into Steve's life. And a lot of people point to the interactions between Steve and Bucky as like, just due to their friendship, like they have a very strong friendship bond. And yes, I do think they have a very strong friendship bond, but I also think that part of the reason they're so important to each other is that they are the last remnants of that past they shared together. They're both out of their time, they both don't belong, and they're both very much aware of this. I think Steve even more so than Bucky perhaps now, because Bucky's at least been integrated a little bit with Wakanda, which is, can we just say, like, the best place in the world? Like, I wish I lived in Wakanda. It seems like a beautiful, glorious place, very technologically advanced, but also very in touch with their history. Like, yes please, sign me up. With Bucky gone, having turned to dust right in front of Steve, Steve's very likely on his last legs, so to speak, very fed up, and even if there's still a vestige of hope that they can be reunited, like, in Steve's position, I'd be losing my shit, anybody would, and because he takes on a leadership role, a very large percentage of the time, he's likely putting on a brave face, but, you know, there's only so far that can get you. All the talk of trading lives in Infinity War, particularly between Vision and Captain America, also leads me to believe that Captain America's not going to make it through this next movie. Talk about trading lives, probably end up trading lives through a sense of dramatic irony just based on the way the movies go before. A lot of my theories are based off of little hints and patterns that I've seen throughout all the movies. So all the talk of trading lives makes me think that Steve Rogers would sacrifice himself, would trade his life in an instant to bring back the lives of others as the part of the endgame. A lot of people say that Tony could sacrifice himself, and I do really believe that Tony Stark could be the self-sacrificial type, but I don't see him doing it. I see Steve taking his place, and I see this for a number of reasons. It would make Steve and Tony's storyline resolve quite nicely if Steve were to do an action like this. I think that their friendship, if their friendship wasn't repaired by that, I don't know what could repair it. Let's put it that way. So even if they make attempts at repairing their friendship before that, that really would seal the deal, I think. Oh, this is a smaller detail, but in the beginning of Avengers Infinity War, we see, in one of the first scenes, we see Tony Stark and Pepper Potts having a conversation about having a child. And I think that this is very, very important for several reasons. Many people thought that it was because of Peter Parker's childlike role towards Tony Stark's parental role over Peter Parker, and just losing him like that when he's dusted. In Infinity War was heartbreaking, like losing a child. And I think that there's a lot of legitimacy to that theory, but I also do think that that particular scene could have several aspects of importance to it. Though it could indicate, or just like highlight the parental, like child-parent relationship between those two, I do think that in the end he has someone, he has Pepper, he has the possibility of marriage and a family, and that's something that Steve just doesn't have the same equivalent to in his storyline. And so I think that Steve could take the place of Tony as far as the self-sacrificial thing goes, and I can actually see Iron Man naming his child that he and Pepper will have after Steve Rogers. And I think that would be heartbreaking. I would absolutely bawl my eyes out. But I think that it's actually a very likely thing that we could see happening. With Tony and Pepper talking about having a kid, and Steve not really having anything left in this timeline, him sacrificing himself and them naming a child after him in commemoration would resolve their issues with friendship, would restore Steve's status as a hero, which is something that he holds in very high regard, and it would just tie everything up in a neat little, super sad, super depressing, but also strangely uplifting, so bittersweet bow. I also think that I do think that one thing that they need to tie up with Steve Rogers, whether they tie it up in like an afterlife type scene or by actually sending him back in time, which some people have said time travel is a huge possibility for this movie. I do think he is going to have his last dance with Peggy Carter, and I think that she might actually make an allusion to her. She could say, "Oh, you're early," indicating that he's died too soon, or possibly if he goes back in time, she'll call him late. I don't know, something cute with that. They'll find some way to include it so that it doesn't mess up the storyline or continuity at all. I think that could be a pretty interesting thing to see. Again, something that would break my heart. Doctor Strange. So, I don't have much to say on Doctor Strange, except for the fact that I noticed a couple interesting things. So, obviously Avengers Endgame, the title itself, is an allusion to when Strange said we're in the Endgame now, in Infinity War, symbolizing that this is the path they needed to go down the entire time. Whether or not the Avengers take the actions to ensure that this is the storyline in which they win remains to be seen, although I'm pretty sure it's safe to say that the good guys will win out, because I just don't see them ending Marvel's big Avengers franchise with an ultimate loss for their good guys. I just don't think that's realistic to expect at this point. So another thing I thought was interesting about Doctor Strange is actually not something that took place in Infinity War at all. All this stuff with the Time Stone going on, obviously, is very notable. My theories with Doctor Strange, believe it or not, are actually tied in rather closely with Ant-Man. Now, Ant-Man, when we last saw him, spoiler alert for Ant-Man and the Wasp, he was in the quantum realm, with the only people who knew he was there being Dustin. So taken away. It looks kind of dire for him. He was stuck there, but when we saw one of the trailers, if you've seen the trailers for Avengers Endgame, you will have obviously noticed that Scott Lang, aka Ant-Man, does show up at the front door of the Avengers headquarters. Now, exactly how he got there, I'm not entirely sure, although I do feel like Doctor Strange or Wong could have had something to do with it, plucking him out of the quantum realm, because if we think back to Doctor Strange's movie itself, the quantum realm, when I saw it, kind of was reminiscent to me of when the Ancient One was sending a very disbelieving Stephen Strange through all those like realms and alternate universes to show him that magic and the mystic arts is in fact a very real thing, is a very serious thing. One of those things reminded me of the quantum realm when he was flashing through all those realms, so it's possible that he could have remembered his little foray into the quantum realm and looked into the future and plucked Ant-Man out of the quantum realm somehow, sling ring maybe, I'm not quite sure, and just tossed him in to help with the Avengers. Ant-Man's a big question mark to me. Like, namely, how did he get out of the quantum realm? I'm gonna go back to what I said a couple minutes ago, that I think it's safe to assume the Avengers will win the day. But the question is, how did they get there? The big thing that's most interesting to me is how they get from point A to point B and who will help them along the way. Now, Ant-Man is somebody who got in early to kind of in the middle of the current Avengers franchise, and he to me is an interesting choice. I love him. I think he's a lot of fun. I think Paul Rudd does a fantastic job with the character, but I don't quite think that he has the capabilities to get out of the quantum realm on his own, especially with the only people who knew he was in there having disappeared, having been dusted. I just don't think that he actually has the ability to get out of there on his own. So he definitely had to have external help. Now, who that help was from could also be very important. I'm gonna go back to Loki for a second. Provided Scott Lang didn't get out of the quantum realm on his own, it's possible to assume that someone else is actually taking the form of Scott Lang and showing up at the Avengers headquarters. Again, this is just a theory, but I have a theory that the Scott Lang, and bear with me here because I'm going to explain, the Scott Lang who shows up at the Avengers headquarters is not Scott Lang at all. I think that there's a possibility that it could be Loki. Now put yourself in Loki's position. You want to take down Thanos, you want to get revenge on Thanos, but the only people you know who could help you do this are the Avengers, and the last time you saw most of the Avengers, they were not too friendly to you. Also, the last time you saw your brother, who was one of the only people who would vouch for you, aka Thor, he was also in almost as dire of a situation that you are. Now, if I'm Loki, I would assume that Thor has not been able to make contact with the Avengers, and that the Avengers would not welcome me too kindly. Therefore, I would take on, if I wanted to help them, I would take on a form that was not threatening to them, that was not friendly, but still, that they would still find useful and that they wouldn't turn away in their time of need. And that makes Ant-Man the perfect figure for this. He's friendly, he has the right demeanor, he's proven himself useful, although he's proven that he also isn't a huge threat to them. So if I were somebody who was once an enemy of the Avengers trying to get back with them to help, this is the exact person I would choose to disguise myself as. Also, some of you might say, well, who says he would even help the Avengers at all? Well, I say he would help the Avengers because given his redemption arc, this is a safe assumption to make, I think. Before I wrap up, Captain Marvel, obviously, I can tell just from the trailers alone that she kicks ass, and she's going to be a huge help to the Avengers team. I don't quite know what her storyline as an individual is and how that will play into this movie. I mostly make my predictions for movies based off of storylines and what would make the most sense for characters. For example, Steve Rogers and not having much of a place, Tony and the child, and wanting to have a child, Loki and his redemption arc. So I can't really say much about what I think Captain Marvel's role in this is going to be. However, I think she's going to be hugely helpful and really cement her place as a force to be reckoned with in the MCU. I'm very excited for Avengers Endgame. I will come back with another video after I see Captain Marvel. I will do my reaction to Captain Marvel, my theories based off of Captain Marvel and her whole storyline, her as a person, how she interacts with Nick Fury, all those guys, end credit scenes that I'm very excited for. Thanks so much for tuning in. I will have another video posted next week. My name is Mara Merlin, and I will catch you guys later. If you like this video, please subscribe. I will be posting new videos every week, and they will usually be of the nerdy variety, so stick around.